What is it all about? How was it first done? How did that change in the early 2000s? How did that change again? And now let's talk about how it's done today, right? So, because it's going to change tomorrow, I mean, most things do. And if you understand how we got to where we are, in my opinion, you're much better set up to understand how to cope with what's coming in the future.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Indie Unplugged. My name is Vaughan, and tonight I have an extraordinary guest with us tonight. Let me take a moment to introduce Serona Elton, who is a distinguished music industry professional and educator, currently serving as a full professor and director of music industry program at the University of Miami Frost School of Music, as well as a Yamaha Master Educator, which I'm actually interested in how you obtain that type of certification. She also leads educational partnerships for the Mechanical Licensing Collective, also known as the MLC, where she engages with future music industry professionals. Serona's extensive career includes senior roles at Warner Music Group, EMI Recorded Music, alongside consulting for major companies like Sony Music, Universal Music, and a few others. She is a recognized expert in the music licensing and royalties field, where she has contributed to various publications and co-authored the Music Business Handbook and Career Guide. In 2023, she was honored with the inaugural Music Business Educator of the Year Busy Award. Serona is also deeply involved in global music diplomacy and holds various leadership positions in music education and law. And ladies and gentlemen, let us give a warm welcome to Serona Elton. It is such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yes, thank you. Greatly appreciate it. I know your days and times are busy with all the endeavors and the roles that you play within the music industry, and so I want to say I'm thrilled about this conversation, just to learn more about your journey, and of course, I have tons of questions that I would like to ask and get your perspective on. But most importantly, I am interested in your journey, especially getting into music. Right? I mean, you are a veteran music industry professional, and I use that word veteran because you have been and are currently involved in many facets of the music business, and I think that's extremely important to highlight your involvement in a lot of different initiatives and a lot of different things that you're involved in, and a lot that I want to get into. One from a selfish perspective, there's one I'm really interested in asking you about, and we'll get to that one as well. But if you could just shed some light on your journey and what got you interested into in music, and specifically the music business side.
So, I think my story in that regard is a pretty common one. Once upon a time when I was a very young teenager, probably around 13 or 14, I thought I had some musical talent. I was mistaken. But I decided to, try my hand at it for a minute, trying to see if actually, my demo could spark some interest. And it did, but that did not pan out. And I realized, okay, so I'm not going to pursue career as a performer, but it was unmistakable, the passion that I had for music and the inner workings of the industry. I found it fascinating, and I loved that it was a way to still be a part of music without being on the talent side of things. And so that lit that spark quite a long time ago. And I will say, when I meet new people in the industry and we end up talking about how they got into it, it's a pretty common story that, people maybe started by loving music as a listener, then maybe had some talent or thought they had some talent, but at some point realized that a career as the talent was not going to work. But at that point, they were drawn in and just knew they had to be a part of it.
Mm, I can absolutely resonate with that. I think each person has to have some amount of self-awareness of their abilities when it comes to being in this music industry. Longest time I thought I was going to be a singer, and that never really panned out. So, um, and of course, I am a testament now because I am on this side of the world, doing this side of the industry versus actually being an actual creative from that perspective. So, so for
So
you,
we have
what?
that in common.
Yeah, we have that in common. So was that the moment for you at Criteria Studios where it was like, I think I want to go in a different direction?
So the Criteria Studios piece actually predated that. So Criteria Studios is a famous recording studio in South Florida. And I got to be there as a child because at the time my father was in the television commercial business, and Criteria had a part of the building that had offices in it separate from the recording studios,
Mm,
and his office happened to be in that building, which was why I was there in the lobby. um, and the lobby was, 2 stories high of platinum records on the walls.
mm, mm,
And that was when I just really sort of fell in love with music and all that that might mean beyond just listening to the radio. It was then a number of years later when I thought I had some musical talent. That didn't work out, but I, through the process of trying to pursue that, met some music industry people. At that point, I was, more like 13, 14, junior high school kind of age. That was when, I thought, wow, okay, I want to be a part of this somehow, no matter what. So that happened a few years after Criteria.
mm.
But, from that point forward, I just always known.
Ah, okay. Yeah, we always have that moment in life that kind of is that trigger or that pivotal moment of how we really solidify where we want to truly be. And regardless if it happens for us at a young age or at a much later age, uh, we make that determination and we go, this is the path. And it's always interesting because paths are never straight, and
Never,
they're,
never straight.
they're never straight, right? So for you, what paths have you taken along your journey to position yourself to where you are today?
Well, I'm not a youngster, so there's been a lot of twists and turns.
Me either.
I think the path, the path that I sort of, when I would really say I got serious about being in the music industry, that path was pretty straight and involved, an ever growing set of activities that were more involved and more involved and more involved, and you have to stop me if I give you too much
No, no,
detail, but
I love detail.
it started really when I was a college student. I started working on 2 locally produced music video shows. This is a long time ago, back when, in addition to MTV and BET, there were also locally created, locally produced, usually at the local cable channel, music video shows. And so I started off working on these 2 music video shows in college, and one of them I was an on-air music news person, and the other I would help set up interviews with artists that would come through town or like the nearing region. And that was really, I would call those my first real roles in the music industry. that really solidified for me that this was a career path I wanted to pursue. So after that and finishing my undergrad degree, I decided to get a master's in music industry at the University of Miami, which, is a bit of a full circle thing because now I'm back running that program. But I pursued that master's degree, knowing that, I wanted a career in this part of the industry. And so that path was somewhat straight. It didn't do a lot of winding. And then from there, I finished that degree and moved to New York to take a job with one of the major record companies at the time, EMI. And so again, that path was pretty straight. And while I was at EMI, I worked on a number of different kinds of jobs, different roles. But then this is an example of a turn. After about 8 years in New York and 8 years at EMI, and after all those years of wanting to be in the music business, I really decided, what? Actually, I want to move back to South Florida where I grew up. I want to be closer to family, and I want to do something else.
Mm.
And so I took a total different turn and actually did move back to South Florida and became an assistant state attorney for the prosecutor's office in Miami-Dade County.
Oh, wow.
And that was fascinating. That's a whole nother chapter of my life. And I'm very glad that I had that experience. But after a handful of years there, I really, that calling came back and
Mm.
said, no, I really do want to get back to the music business. And so at that point, as I was figuring out how I'm going to get back in, I came across the opportunity to become a professor, right? Starting as a junior level professor at the University of Miami. By then, it was called the Frost School of Music within the University of Miami, but I knew the program really well, being an alumni of it. And so that was, another twist, right? That was music industry, but from a very different perspective than what, I had been doing at EMI.
Hmm.
So that would be of another twist in that path. But then at that point, actually, I would say my life split into two parallel paths.
Oh, wow.
And that's what's been the case ever since then. One path was the academia path, and within, universities and colleges, there is a career path for professors to follow. But I also then started working back in the music business in the kinds of things I was doing at EMI, but for other companies as a consultant and, in some ways in some cases as an employee. And so I've ever since then had these two lives, really,
Mm.
one of which is in academia and one of which is in the industry. And, that those jobs have kind of been very similar. There's been a thread throughout all of them, but not identical. They've all been a little bit different from each other.
Mm. Mm. That's very interesting. Um, so how do you balance that, right? So both as a industry professional and as a licensed attorney, that is a very unique intersection of law and music business. So how do you navigate the complexities of those two fields, and what are some of the legal challenges that you foresee becoming more prominent from that perspective?
Well, so firstly, on the legal point, let me make a point. I am a licensed attorney, licensed in Florida and New York, although I technically retired from New York. I do not take on legal clients. I
Mm.
don't represent people. That was never the work that I did in the music industry. I've worked on lots of legal type issues and lots of licensing activities, but I am not somebody's lawyer and I don't take legal clients.
Mhm.
So I've always thought of myself more as a business person with legal knowledge and a law degree than I have as like a lawyer in the music industry. But the balance, balance is something that all of us professionals are always struggling with, balance of work life balance and all of that. I think what has worked out really amazingly is that my two professional lives, the academic life, the business executive business professional life, they have such great overlap that it hasn't been a struggle. For example, in my academic life here at the Frost School of Music at the University of Miami, it's really important to us that all of our professors in the School of Music are very active in their field, right?
Mhm.
They're not just doing professor stuff. They're also, highly engaged with whatever that thing is that they're teaching. And so, there's encouragement to stay active in the industry, right? When you're a professor, depending on the path you're on as a professor, there is an allowance for you to work on scholarship and creative activities. And for me, the industry work that I do is a form of scholarship in that regard. So the two lives sort of fit well together. Those professional roles that I've had ever since I became an educator have always been part-time, not full-time. And so, I've managed to make those different things all kind of just come together well, with leaning in a lot to doing a lot of work in the summertime,
Mhm.
when I'm not teaching, for example. And I will actually also say I should add a sort of like a third path, an offshoot of my educator path, which is that I'm now a book author as well. I took over a leading textbook in the music industry called the Music Business Handbook and Career Guide that was already had 12 editions published, and I came on board and sort of took over editing and revising and updating it with the 13th edition. So when I look at my professional life now, I really often think of it in three buckets, the academic work, the music industry work, and the book. And it all just somehow fits together. But, I'm not going to lie, generally, like typically on a weekday, I'm working till quite late in the evening. I don't really have much of a life on a weekday evening. I push all my socializing to the weekends.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so you had asked about legal issues that
Well,
might be coming.
not so much legal issue. Well, I guess in that case, so when you look at from your purview, what do you see as some of the biggest legal challenges or misconceptions that are currently shaping within the music industry today?
Hmm. Um, So, I mean, I think one of the challenges out there that everybody's certainly talking about is artificial intelligence,
Mhm.
AI, and what is the right approach to it. And I think what I'm seeing, I think is the right answer, which is a combination of both the industry leaning into it and embracing it in terms of doing deals with companies to allow them to use content and figuring out ways of uh, utilizing it from a creation perspective, from an engagement perspective, really not being afraid of it, but
Right.
figuring out, hey, how do we make something great work here? But at the same time, also figuring out how do we regulate this?
Mm.
Because, there are rights that need to be protected. We're not going to just abandon that. And so, I think the fact that we have both things happening at the same time, business, solutions, business deals, ways of doing things that are being worked on actively, which is really exciting, as well as efforts to figure out how are we going to regulate this to protect creators' rights and rights
Mhm.
holders' rights. So I think that's something that's on everybody's minds nowadays. And right now we have more questions than answers. It's early days,
Mhm.
but I think that double strategy of doing both at the same time is really important. I don't know if there's any sort of misconceptions or anything. I would just say that the music industry is complicated, and the
Very.
way people make money, it all connects back to most of it connects back to rights. And so having like a good foundational understanding of what the rights are that a creator or a rights holder has in their song or in their sound recording or in their video, having that basis of understanding really helps you then build on that to understand how revenue is made.
Mm.
So I would just say it's complicated. So there's probably a lot of misunderstanding about how it works simply because people haven't had the opportunity or the time to actually learn about it, right? It's not something you're going to learn in like a 1 hour video you watch. It's more than that. It's more complicated than that. And so when I talk to creators, I'm always sort of emphasizing to them, get yourself like a physical or a digital notebook of some kind and start taking notes, because you're not going to be able to carry all this around in your head. It's too much to carry around in your mind. Just, oh yeah, I know how this all works, and just ramble it off. You can't do that. You're not going to be able to do that. You're going to want to write it down and take time to learn it, and be patient with yourself on that.
Hmm.
So those are some of the thoughts that come to mind that, are worth sharing today.
Hmm. I appreciate that, because I do think we are at the bridge of um, technology and industry, and so now I don't know where you stand, how much you can divulge, having a legal background, et cetera, what you can actually say in regards to the questions I'm getting ready to ask. Uh,
Okay.
so there's two things, right? And so every Monday I actually host a podcast where it's me and another my co-host, and we talk about a variety of different issues that are impacting the independent music space. Hence the name
Mhm.
Indie Unplugged, right?
Right.
Uh, so in one of the episodes, we talked about Suno and Udio, and the suit that is getting ready to take place from the big three. Uh, and to hear you talk about the duality of it, as far as they're embracing it, and but also not being fearful of it. Um, what's your perspective when it comes to what's happening with Udio and Suno, and how they're using, allegedly is what they're saying, using copywritten music to train their AI models?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can't comment on that specific
Right.
lawsuit. There's a number of really important lawsuits out there, and one batch of lawsuits. The topic has to do with the use of protected works in training those AI generative models, right? And there's you could ask 10 different music lawyers, you might get 10 slightly different opinions. There's one mindset that says that using copyrighted works in that way is an infringement of the copyright in those works. And the opposite position on that says that actually this should be considered a fair use, which
Mm,
is essentially an exception to infringement, right? And people, come out in different positions about that. In terms of me just personally, not speaking on behalf of the
exactly.
University of Miami, not speaking
Right.
on behalf of the MLC or anybody, right, other than you know, just Serona Elton and me only. I don't think it's fair use. That's my personal take. I think it is copyright infringement, and you should have to get permission if you want your AI to use protected works to be, trained on that. That's
Mm,
my perspective. What's a beautiful thing is that people can have different points of view on things and speak their mind, and then we, go to court, fight it out, get some kind of legal clarification from either the courts or through legislation.
mhm,
And so, we don't have a resolution to that question yet. I suspect, however, one of these cases or multiple cases will pan out. Wouldn't surprise me if whoever loses appeals that decision, and we end up continuing to appeal it up and up and up to a very senior court level, or maybe we'll get legislation that resolves that.
mhm,
So it's an open question, and I can certainly see and understand the arguments both for either direction. My own personal, just me as one person, my opinion is not any more important than anybody else's. Is that using protected work to train I believe is infringement, but others would disagree.
Yeah, we were talking about the Andy Warhol Foundation case, where the court had ruled that. Now, let me make sure I'm clear. I am not a lawyer at all by any trade. And so, but in that case, they were discussing that it wasn't an actual derivative of the work, right? But I guess there was something about the photography, and Andy Warhol was using the Prince photography to create screen prints, and the main photographer was suing, right? And the court had ruled it wasn't an actual complete derivative of the work, that it was literally almost like a copy of the work. And I guess that was kind of their justification to say that, well, they had ruled that it was fair use, and then the higher court ended up ruling that it wasn't fair use. But I agree. I think I think we will see what's going to happen. And I do believe there's going to be legislation that is put into place on that governs how the AI generative organizations are using music in that fashion. So I think that's very interesting. I'm waiting to see what happens. Now, of course, I'm sure everybody in the music industry space is waiting to see what happens. Um,
Oh yeah,
so
these cases are being watched very closely by everybody. Absolutely.
and then I think the second question is, because we talked about this on Monday, was the unauthorized use of music by politicians, right? And so, and I mean, we've really gotten to a conversation about, can't do music creatives and artists have the ability to force anyone to, in this case, we're talking about um, political figures using their music on social media and at rallies. And I've had people chime in. We've had discussion. We were talking about it on the podcast on Monday, because there's a gentleman that lives here. I won't get into the specifics of who he is, but his estate is currently suing um, the Trump administration for illegal use of his father's music. Um, I mean, so where do music creatives and artists stand when it comes to the use of their music in these types of venues and in these types of ways?
So it's a legal question, right? It's a legal question,
Okay.
and you have to look at the very specific facts of the use. And I don't know that the fact that it's politics makes any difference.
Yeah, I don't think.
So, for example, if you have an advertisement on TV, right, that's a synchronization license, and you're not allowed, nobody is allowed to use anybody else's music without a synchronization license, or it's copyright infringement. It's pretty straightforward, right? The use of music on social media, it has to be licensed. It's just that simple, right? So most uses of music require there to be a license in place. And if there is no license, it's copyright infringement. Pretty straightforward. Where sometimes people, things can get confusing. This is a lot to get into in a podcast that's not going to go deep into all the legal issues, right? That's always the risk, that you try to explain a complicated legal topic in just a few words and you end up confusing people worse. At a typical arena, for example, right, a basketball arena, that arena has a license that allows music to be performed in the arena in what's called a non-dramatic way, right? So, for example, you're walking through the lobby, you hear some music playing, or even there's a concert and the artist is playing some music. The venue itself has a license from the performing rights organizations like ASCAP and BMI.
Right.
That's for non-dramatic use. But when a political candidate, let's say, is having a rally at an arena, and then they use music as part of the show that's like their walk-on music, some could argue that's a dramatic use. Now, it's meant to make a point, to further the plot. It's not just
Mhm.
like lobby music, right, or something. And then you start getting into the legal nuances of, you have to literally look at the language of what that ASCAP and BMI license says about how music can be used at that arena,
Mhm.
right? And it may even exclude use in a political event, in which case now you've got a public performance with no license, and that's an infringement. So
Mhm.
it's a legal analysis, completely, and it's very fact specific, and different set of facts for a TV ad or an internet ad or a website or a social media or in an arena. You have to look at the nitty gritty facts and
Mhm.
say, is there a license in place? What kind of license? If there's no license, it's probably an infringement. So you have to get very fact specific.
Mhm. Yeah, I appreciate you taking a moment to answer those two questions. Like I said, I am by far no attorney. I don't have a legal background. I'm trying to convince my wife to go to law school. Um, she's really good at
Well, that
making
would be amazing.
points. And so, I mean, she really is, though. So I'm like, if there was someone in our family who was going to be a lawyer, I absolutely would like for it to be her because she's the one to be able to do that. Not me. No, I don't do that.
Amazing.
I
Amazing.
am in learning and development. I've been doing learning and development for the past 26 years. So that's what I do in my
Got
day
it.
job. But
We
so
all
let's
have our superpowers.
my superpower is in learning and development, and
Got
doing
it.
organizational development with Fortune 100, Fortune 50 companies. But anyway, that's a different side,
Okay.
right? So that's kind of like my own trajectory and different paths of where I
Right.
end. But I do want to go back for a second. I do want to spend some moments talking about the Music Business Handbook and Career Guide, and just kind of
Sure.
right. So, I mean, that is a go-to resource for many here in the music industry, uh, right? And now that you've taken over, what are your um, desires and intention for people to take away from that resource, from that guide?
I think one of the things that makes it unique is it is truly a textbook. And what I mean by that is if you think about textbooks are written for teaching purposes, right? And when you're teaching a topic, you and take the music industry as a topic, for example, right? One way I could teach you would be to just say to you, this is how we do this thing today. You just have to do these 5 steps and you're good. That's one way I could teach it. But actually, there's another way that I could teach it that I prefer to teach it, which is to say to you, let me explain what this is all about. Why are we doing this? What is this thing? And how did it get started? And how has it evolved over time? Right?
Mm,
Why do we do it? What is it all about? How was it first done? How did that change in the early 2000s? How did that change again? And now let's talk about how it's done today, right?
mm,
So, because it's going to change tomorrow, I mean, most things do. And if you understand how we got to where we are, in my opinion, you're much better set up to understand how to cope with what's coming in the future.
mm,
And so, as a textbook, it does that, right? So, if you have a topic about, like, a chapter about recorded music, it talks about the beginning of the record business up to today. It explains how we got here, but then it also talks about today, right? What are we doing today? And it explains concepts, to you. And it has a glossary with terms, right? And it's got all that stuff in there. So to me, that's what makes it a bit different than some of the other books that are out there, which are, there's a whole handful of books that I recommend. They all have different purposes. But what makes this unique is that kind of whole bigger context and backstory to get you to fully understand the whole concept of what we're talking about.
right.
The other thing about the book that I'm excited about that I'm going to be working on in the starting in a few months for the next edition is, we often talk about the music industry as if it's just got one set of common practices. But the truth is that some ways that things are done work quite differently by genre. Right? The
Mm,
way something might end up being done in Latin music, and I don't mean the music itself, I mean music business activities. The way something might be done in Latin genre might be different than in hip hop, than in country music, right? For example, the way that people who work on creating a song, even if they're doing that at the same time that they're creating the track, the sound recording, how they decide to split up the shares of the song between them to get to 100% is quite different if you're talking about a country song in Nashville versus a hip hop track in New York.
mm,
And so the next edition of the book is going to explore these differences and really, uncover them and talk about them so that people understand, Latin, hip hop, jazz, country, pop, not every, genre known to man I won't be able to cover, but several of the big ones, to just talk about where there are some differences in common industry practices, right?
Mm.
I think that would be helpful to the readers for the future.
Hmm. Why do you think? Why do you think there are different practices uh, across
I mean,
genres?
they've evolved over time. I mean, I think each of them has evolved over time to just sort of become the norm, right? And you know, sometimes there are reasons, but often it's very difficult to uncover the reason, in that there isn't a big long explanation. It's a little bit arbitrary. It's just like, well, that's how we've always done it,
Hmm.
and these practices just evolve that way over time.
Okay. Well, I mean that makes sense. I mean, every organization has their own. If I was to look at it from like an organizational perspective, every organization has their set of principles, their set of
Mhm.
conduct, and how they engage. So I guess I can see it from the same perspective. And the music business isn't one big holistic piece. It has different moving parts and different segments that all have their own roots and backgrounds and experiences and cultures and nuances and
Exactly.
idiosyncrasies and all these different components and different things that make up what we I guess eventually call the music industry. I
That's
mean, but
right.
the music industry is a very complex um, place to be in, and I would encourage, and I'm sure as you are through an educational perspective, and also through literacy, is making sure that people have the right knowledge, the right tools. For us here at our parent company, We Create Music TV, we are really all about helping people develop the right mindset, skill set, and tool set. And so, if they have at least those three, the right mindset and how they see the world and how they interpret the music space that they're in, the skills to be able to do what it is they need to do, and all of the resources and skills, then and this is one of those. I encourage anybody, to go out and get it now. And of course, when the 14th edition come out, to take part in that and to learn all the new things that are being added, and even from uh, a forward-thinking future perspective and seeing what's coming down the pike, where you can start to say, here's some things we need to start consider. Um, I'm always about disruption, and so I'm
Mhm.
always interested in what is coming that is going to eventually disrupt the way that we do things in the music industry. Um, from your perspective, what do you think are some of those disruptors that you may see coming? That they may be here now, there may be grassroots around them, um, but I guess I'm just interested from your perspective. What do you kind of see as industry disruptors?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I'll be honest with you. I'm not a futurist, and often, you know. People who do make all kinds of predictions have all kinds of reasons why they like to. So I think what is very obvious and will continue a disruption path that it has already begun is the growth of different kinds of services that artists can tap into in
Mm,
order to release their music independently and reach their audiences in a way that they can make a living, right? We have seen this evolve over time. It's a broad kind of trajectory that we're on, right? And it goes back to the earliest days of artists being able to release their music independently without the use of a record label, and the first set of digital distributors like your CD Baby, and your TuneCore, that all of a sudden kind of gave this on ramp, this way in for independent artists. And and that happened quite a long time ago. But what you've been seeing steadily as you look at those digital type distributors or aggregators, as they're sometimes called, they're continuing to expand the services they provide to artists, right? You see some of them getting into providing publishing administration services, because a lot of independent artists are also creating their songs, right? Writing them by themselves or with co-writers, and are in need of support for a publishing administration. And other kinds of marketing activities, synchronization, pitching, and placement, right? So, I mean, I think what we're seeing there is this disruption trend that says, it is no longer true that the only way you can get your recorded music out to people is with the help of a record label. Um, and so that path, I think, will just continue to evolve. And the existing companies in that space will continue to offer services, building upon what they already offer, as they see unmet needs of recording artists who may also be songwriters, right? One of the things that I haven't seen much, but I keep hoping I'll see, is that a lot of independent artists really need good management. And the challenge with the manager model historically is that a manager, gets paid a percentage of what the artist makes.
Oh yeah.
And so if you have a young artist, meaning, young professionally artist who's not making much money, it's going to be really hard to persuade a knowledgeable manager to, basically get paid almost nothing and take a risk on, putting in all that work with the hope that you're going to be big. But in the meantime, you're not making much money, so they're not making much money, right? One of the things I would love to see is, companies pop up that actually can provide that manager as like a consultant. Like, go ahead and pay your $100 to get an hour with this top manager, where you can like pick their brain, talk about your marketing plan, talk about everything, get their feedback. That kind of consulting, thing for artists, because I think sometimes you need that expert advice. I meet people all the time that are like, well, is there somebody you can put me in touch with that I can talk to? And I'm often at a loss, like, no, really, I don't. There isn't somebody you could just call up and book an hour with. And so, that I haven't seen that, but I keep hoping that I'll hear somebody start something like that. And maybe it does exist. I just don't know yet.
Mhm.
So I just think we're going to continue on that trend of more and more services of various kinds being offered to independent artists. And what that does is it does put pressure, I think good pressure, on independent and major record labels to continue needing to explain why you should sign with them, right? And there are a lot of really great reasons. It's a very
Mhm.
compelling story,
Right.
but it forces them to keep that story compelling, which ultimately benefits artists, right? When artists have choices, then it forces everybody who is vying for that artist business to really offer up something of value. And we all benefit from that.
Hmm. Yeah, I would like to see that as well. I appreciate that perspective. I would like to see that as well. I know that there is what we do here and what I see other people do, but more from an independent perspective. Not so much where you have maybe a veteran music manager who offers service, and I know several, and I'm sure you do as well. I know several that live here in Atlanta and they manage big time artists. I don't think that I mean, that's not a service that they offer, that where
No,
you
most don't.
where a artist can call them up and say, "Hey, I got some questions," from a professional music manager who's been in the music industry and has helped to manage artists and music creatives at certain levels, right? Because there was a time when I did management, I was managing uh, an artist, and now I have industry connections, but not like what a professional music manager who has 20 years of experience working with major artists and maybe even uh, mid-size. I won't say mid-size, but um, regional artists as well, and helping them to be successful. There isn't anything like that. I don't think I've run across, but that would be great though. because I think they need that, right? Because often you hear, uh, and no shade when it comes to that, but what you hear usually is, oh, you want what you want to know about this music industry? Well, here is Donald Passman's book. Here's Ari's
Right.
book. Here's the Music Business Handbook and Career Guide. Like,
Yeah.
go read those, and then you'll get
Good
what you
luck.
need. Right? Good luck. You'll get what you need out of those. Help, figuring out how to decipher, all the stuff that's in all of these books. But good luck to you. Um, where you can actually call up a lawyer and retain a lawyer for a certain, you know, a fee. Um, I don't know. I think that would be. I think that would kind of change a lot of different things from an artist. I mean, heck, artists don't even want to sometimes go through artist development. Yeah, so
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how good they would be at trying to um, get a manager because, and the reason why I say that is because a lot of times artists want to do, and this is from my purview when it comes to indie artists. A lot of them want to try to figure out on their own. They don't want somebody else to tell them how they think they should do it. And I mean, sometimes it's like children, right? It's when I was a kid, my mom, don't touch the hot stove. You want to touch the hot stove, right? You want to go out and see for yourself how that works. But I do think having an industry expert available to you that you can have on retainer, if that's the case, is something that will help exponentially grow someone's career. So I think that's a great. Uh, but every time I hear ideas, my brain starts. I'm a very innovative individual. My brain always starts to work when I hear certain things. Okay,
Got it.
so there's a couple things I'm actually interested in. One, I'm interested in your journey into the MLC and being one of the pioneers with the I always get it. It's a tongue twister. The modern, right? It's always a tongue
Music
twister.
Modernization
The
Act.
Music Modernization Act, yes. And so,
Okay.
just kind of talk about that, and what has been some of the biggest transformations you've seen from that act in the lives of music creatives. So of course, how did you get into the MLC, right? Because that's something that's major, and then uh, the Music Modernization Act, and then what are the hopes and desires, or at least from a transformative perspective, for music creatives today?
So it's funny. In my mind, I think of my journey into the MLC as actually having started a long time ago. Because while I was at EMI, one of the last role that I was in there, and this is more than 20 years ago, was that I was running the department that was securing mechanical licenses for EMI in the US. And so, my involvement with mechanical licensing started more than 20 years ago. And a lot of the work I've done over all the many years has been closely connected to mechanical licensing. And so, I was watching very closely as the MMA passed, involved in discussions leading up to the MMA and understanding, being in industry conversations like, how's this going to change things? What's going to be different after this? And so I was watching very, very closely. And, the people that work in mechanical licensing in the US, it's a pretty small community, frankly. It's a very niche
Right.
part of the music business, very small group of people. And so once it was formed, the law passed, and then it formed, there was a whole process of a group of people coming together and several different groups, proposing to have themselves be designated as the MLC, a process with the Copyright Office of designating that. And then at some point, fast forward over the course of about a year and a half, they hired a CEO. And the CEO was somebody who I worked very closely with in my role at Warner Music Group. That's where he worked as well. And we knew each other very well, worked on a number of projects together. We're really good friends and colleagues. And as he moved into the CEO role at the MLC, we were talking about it, and it is so obvious to everybody involved how important the role of the MLC is in educating rights holders and creators about what this is and who is entitled to collect this money. And frankly, it's a kind of complicated message, actually, because there's a lot of nuances to it. And while we worked together at Warner, he knew of my second parallel life as an educator. And so, it just sort of came together so naturally, like it was destiny to say, let's create this role that doesn't exist at other music companies.
Mm,
There is no head of educational partnerships at other music companies. That's not a thing music companies do. But we created this role specifically for me. And in this role, there's a couple of key things that I do. My primary role actually is creating materials and programs that connect with music business students studying in college and professors to help them teach about the MLC. And that's obviously a pretty natural thing for me to do because I am a professor and I teach. So I'm from that world. I'm in that world. But the other things that I do is a lot of public speaking, webinars, speaking at conferences, explaining what the MLC is, what mechanical royalties are, who's entitled to collect them. And, it's ultimately, I explain things for a living. If you ask me to like summarize what I do right now, I explain things for a living. And so that's a natural fit for me. And I create a lot of helpful information like infographics and explainer videos and things that the MLC uses to get the word out to everybody about what it's all about. So it just was such a, it was in many ways, it's the dream job. It's like this perfect combination of my world as an educator and my world as somebody who's been involved in mechanical licensing and royalties for over 20 years and merging those two knowledge and skill sets together. So I just love my role.
hmm Yeah, that's one I always tell people. Organizations will do what is necessary to accomplish their mission, right? And so whether it is the creation of a role, a division, a department, whatever it may be. But that's exciting to hear. I mean, I can hear as someone who's in learning and development, I understand what it takes and the type of role that you're in educating and ensuring that people have access to once again the appropriate tools they need to be successful. So you spend a lot of your time doing exactly what you're doing now, and I was spending a lot of my time actually in face to face stand up types of training sessions and conferences. So um, the MLC is absolutely important to what is taking place in the music industry today. And I do remember the time before the MLC existed, and was really looking at, and a lot of my peers here in Atlanta were part of that process. And just really, I mean, I probably wasn't as watching it as close as they were, because some of them were instrumental in helping get that legislation passed. But I think it is something that is very beneficial to all music creatives, and that really helps them through that. And one, to understand the licensing process, but also in the collection of those royalties and things like that. I think that's the thing. I was listening to something today, and they were talking about the black box, and they were like, the guy was like, "Don't let your stuff go to the black box, because as soon as it gets to the black box, is going to do his thing on some other places." But it's always interesting to hear to get that perspective. I mean, because people on the outside of music licensing, and the organizations that delve deep into music licensing may have a different perspective on what they do. Um, and so it's good to hear, one, for me, that there's an educational department that helps in communicating the purpose, the information that is needed. Um, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges that the MLC faces today?
That's a good question. I mean, I think our challenge has been and will always be to continue reaching everybody who's entitled to receive the money. It's a complicated thing, and sometimes it can feel a little like, people wonder, is the effort worth it?
Mhm.
If you have a track that you've written, that song that recording is based on, and it's up on a service like Apple Music or Spotify, and it doesn't have that many streams, it hasn't generated a lot of money. And so, you can be looking at, well, do I want to spend, 20 minutes to set up my data to get a small amount of money? I don't know if it's worth it. That's always going to be a challenge. But I think, for every songwriter that ends up going onto the MLC's website because they watched this interview, there'll be a new person tomorrow who writes their first song and then puts it up on a digital service. So we'll never be done. Like, there's no way to reach 100% of people, because even if you waved a magic wand and today we reached 100% of people, tomorrow there'll be new people who
Exactly.
have just written their first song. And so I think that's our challenge, is always going to be getting the word out. But, we have been able to do, really amazing things in that regard, and have already paid out more than 1 billion, sorry, more than 2 billion, 2 billion, more than $2 billion in only a few short years. And it's very, encouraging. We want to continue to just get that percentage of people we're able to find higher and higher and higher and higher. So I think that is our challenge. It's been our challenge. We're up for it. But it will never not be a challenge, right?
Mhm.
We will always have to be trying to find that person who writes that song, even if they're, when I say write a song, maybe they're programming it, they're creating it all right there at the same time they're making the sound recording, and it's up on a digital service tomorrow, and it's got a stream. Now that means we have money for somebody. And if those people aren't engaging with other parts of the music industry, it can be hard to reach them. If they're not going to conferences, they haven't joined a PRO, they're not reading the publications that we all read. If they're not plugged in, if they're just sort of in their own little zone making music,
Mhm.
it can be hard to reach them. But hey, we're up for the task.
Well, that's good to hear. So I hope those who take part in viewing this interview uh, goes out and looks at all the resources the MLC has provided. I'm always surprised because most people still, if they're not educated enough, they like, I've never heard of the MLC. Oh, well, you should you should because they're the entity that's helping to make sure you get paid. Like that's the big thing, right? Um, okay,
Exactly.
so here's what I'm interested in: leadership
Okay.
music, leadership music,
Oh,
and
okay.
involvement with leadership music. I am a leadership guy, right? So when I don't do this type of podcast when it comes to music, I actually am a leadership guy. I teach leadership. I help coach business
Oh, wow.
leaders. I'm all about leadership development. I'm certified in
Okay.
a gazillion leadership programs from many different leadership organizations, right? Like I said, this is I have a whole nother life outside of just doing music interviews.
Very
But
impressive. Very
I'm
cool.
interested in leadership music. I heard about leadership music from uh, Terry Nelson Carpenter when I think she was
Okay.
just a recent graduate of leadership music, either 2022, probably 2022. So I used to be
Okay.
part of a steering committee here in Atlanta, known as the
Mm.
Association of Independent Music Publishers, AIMP. And we were part of
Hmm.
to get AIMP started here in Atlanta. And Terry was our uh, kind of like our contact, our mentor in this process. Um, and so I had learned about leadership music via her. But anyway, what is leadership music? Can you talk about the purpose of leadership music and your involvement in this organization?
Sure. So, Leadership Music is a nonprofit organization based in Nashville, and and you can go on their website. You can read up all about them. Right, just look up Leadership Music. So what their program involves is every year they take a group of about 44, 45 or so leaders from across the music industry who have applied to be a part of the program. They get many, many more applicants than that. It's a very competitive process. And the particular group of people that they pick, they are really trying for a real balance of people coming from different sectors in the music industry. And by sectors, I mean the record labels or music production or publishing or songwriting, or the live side of the industry, or like radio and digital music services, or academia, right? For example. So they try and put together a very carefully balanced group of leaders to then go through this program over the course of about 9 to 10 months. And what happens through that process is there's like an opening retreat and a closing retreat, but in between all of that, about once a month, there is a full day of a deep dive into one of those sectors of the music industry. And, during that day, you're hearing, you might have a panel, and then you might have an activity, and then you're hearing from an artist talk about something. And then you have, a master class with somebody, right? The course of the day is very different on each of those days, but it's focused on a particular sector of the music industry. And the way I view it is it's almost like getting a degree in music industry in one shot, right? In 1 year. Because what you're doing is, so many leaders in the industry, they have come up in one sector and they know that sector really well. Like, let's say, you spent your whole career working at a record label and you know how that's done really well, especially in the department you work in.
Mhm.
But what you might not really fully understand is, how does the live side work? How does music publishing work? Right. And so the goal, by the time that whole group has gone through each of those full day sessions that explore a sector very deeply, they all come out of that with a much better, well rounded understanding of the entire music industry ecosystem. And
Mm.
that ultimately helps them be better leaders, because they'll understand how the work that they do and the people that they, lead, how what they do impacts other parts of the industry, right? It's a very complicated, interrelated ecosystem. And it gives everybody that's involved a much greater understanding of all those sectors,
Mm.
how they operate, the challenges, all of it. So that's really the goal of it. It makes a bunch of better leaders for their breadth of understanding now of the ecosystem in which they operate.
Mhm. Wow, okay. So how did you get involved with leadership music?
I had heard about it from a number of friends of mine who had done the program themselves. And so, it was literally, some friends were like, hey, you should do leadership music. And I'm like, what is that? And then they told me what I just told you, and I looked it up on their website and I applied. And often people apply, and it might take a number of times before you get selected. For example, they're only going to pick a certain number of people who are professors per year. And so if they only have spots for 2 professors and 8 professors apply, 6 of you aren't getting selected for that year. Right. So it can take a while, but I applied and got selected. And actually, I had known about it because also the year prior to when I actually was a student in it, or a participant in it, I actually was a guest speaker for a session on artist royalties. The prior year. So I even had gotten to go to, a session in one of those days and kind of see it
Mm.
in action a little bit.
So it's like an immersion program. So so I know in organizations, in the organization that I work with, we have an immersion program. It's a year-long program where business leaders are able to work in different business units. And so they're
Okay.
in, well, I don't even want to say it's a year long. It's actually probably longer than that. But they work in these different business units. They may work in finance for 6 months. They may work in
Right.
operations for 6 months. They may work in. So by the time they're done, one, the company has uh, a pool of leaders that they can pull from to operate in different business units if they so desire. And then two, it allows those individuals to have a well-rounded perspective of the organization so that they understand all the interworkings and connectivity of those business units. Okay, so it sounds like to me it's like a an immersion program for not leaders, more leaders and music professionals from that perspective. So that's good. Okay, so the
That's right.
other thing I'm interested in is you are currently serving on the promoting. Make sure I get it right. Promoting peace, education, and cultural exchange through Music Award Committee as part of the U.S. Department of State's Global Music Diplomacy Initiative. Right. That's one. That's a mouthful. But two, that is amazing. That is amazing. So, how do you see music playing a part in global peace and cultural exchange? And what have been some of the most rewarding aspects of this initiative for you?
Well, so I need to say though, this is brand new to me, brand new, and so I don't have a big bunch of perspectives on this. This is literally like brand new, and I'm learning about this initiative. You know, there was a bipartisan law passed a few years ago that created this initiative, and if you were to look at Global Music Initiative and end up on the State Department's website, you can read all about it. It has a couple of different component parts to it. There's some mentoring, there's an award, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm just learning about it right now myself. So I would say I'm not yet an expert in it. I was invited to be a part of this committee that helps identify some potential candidates for this award that recognizes, you know, peace and education and cultural exchange through music. And so I think, music truly is that universal language, and it gives us a way to instantly connect with people from other cultures where, at the face of it, at our first glance, we're like, well, do we have anything in common? And we realize, pretty quickly, music may be one of those things that helps create that commonality. And then that opens the door to, forming these kind of relationships and exchanges of things like culture and education. And so, I'm a big believer in music helping open doors for other kinds of connections, and I really do believe it's the universal language.
Hmm.
And so I'm just so honored and thrilled to be a part of it. But right now, I've literally just been in one meeting, and I'm still learning a lot about it myself. But I was so excited to learn about it. I hadn't really known about it that much, honestly, until it got on my radar, and then I was just blown away by all the things going on. So,
Wow.
yeah.
It sounds very interesting. What the purpose is of peace, and I'm looking forward to, and I'm probably sure you are too, what the initiatives are and how it impacts the music communities. So I'm definitely looking forward to what that is. I had not heard of it until until right now, until the interview. I was like,
Yeah,
this. What is this peace
yeah,
thing? We find out more about peace. So that's going to be very interesting. Um,
definitely.
so last question. And once again, I trust me, I appreciate your time. I know that you're extremely busy. So last question, and I always ask this of everyone. What
Okay.
advice, and I'm sure you probably heard this question many times, what advice would you give to anybody that is getting into the music business, the music landscape? What would you tell them? I mean, there's probably so much you would probably tell them, but what are like the two or three things that you would really give them as that key advice?
Uh, so one would be to take the time, find the time to learn about how it works. I can't imagine any field or discipline that I would just jump into and think I'm going to just know it instantly, right? You just don't, everything takes time. So you have to give yourself that time, and you have to come up with a game plan. Are you going to like say, because I've got a day job, but I really want to understand the music industry. I'm going to set aside an hour or 2 hours every week, and I'm just going to watch a bunch of videos. I'm going to read some books. I'm going to like make time in my life to do this. So I would say, If you really want to be successful in this field, either as an industry person, like professional business person, or a creator, you need to understand how it works. And that's going to take time. So find the time, set the time aside, start that physical or digital notebook, because you're going to read things and you're going to watch videos and like this and others, and you're going to want to take notes. You can't carry it all around up here. It's too much. So think of it, you don't have to go into a formal academic program, right? You don't have to do that. That's an option. And there's lots of flavors out there, from, really small little online certificates that are not that expensive to full on bachelor's and master's degrees, right? There's a lot of different offerings out there. You have to decide what makes sense for you, but anybody can decide that they're going to just devour all of the information that's readily available, without pursuing any kind of formal education, and take the time to learn it. So that'd be my first thing. The second thing I would say is, people that are in this field are in it because they have a passion that drives them, not because of job security, high salaries, low workloads. That's not this industry, right? Students studying music business don't all have jobs lined up by graduation. Whereas, like, I bet all the finance majors do. They've all got all their jobs lined up at banks. That is not how the music industry works. So you don't go into this because it's a great, like, fallback, oh, it's going to be easy. That's not why you go into this. You go into this because you're like, I love music so much, and I have to have my professional life be connected to music somehow. And I don't care if it's long hours. And I don't care if on average my salary is less than people in healthcare or the financial sector. I'm not doing it for the money. I'm doing it because I have to do it. Right? That if you don't have that passion, that's not going to help you overcome those challenges. Right? So I would say, really ask yourself, like, how does this resonate with your passion? That's an important thing. Those would be the main two things I would say. And then if you just, don't let anybody discourage you. But you've got to do the work. You have to do the work.
You have to do the work. Wise words. Wise words. You have to do the work. Serona, thank you for being here today. I greatly appreciate you taking time out of your really busy schedule to just make time for our audience here on the Indie Unplugged. Greatly appreciate you taking the time. Look forward to your continued journey, and looking
Thank
forward
you.
to all the initiatives that you're part of as well. And if nobody's ever
Thank
said, thank you very much for being an educator. Thank you for imparting wisdom into our young professionals,
you.
our young music creatives coming up, to give them the tools, the resources that they need to be successful. So, once again, thanks for joining us. I greatly appreciate it. You make sure you have a great evening. And for our audience members, thank you very much for tuning in. Greatly appreciate all of you as well. And all of you have a great, great night.